This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Finally, the 2025 Formula 1 season is here. We're kicking off in Australia this weekend, and there is a team who seem to have established themselves as favourites going in to the season opener. That team, of course, is McLaren. The burden of expectation is upon them, but can they deliver? What are the problems? What are the concerns? What might stand in their way from delivering on their potential? My name's Tomo. Let's talk about it. McLaren had a fantastic test, didn't they? They really did seem to nail it. Lando in particular setting some really strong benchmark lap times, really good long run race pace as well. It's all well and good being quick over a lap. It's Sunday that delivers the points, right? And in Bahrain, even though the weather was tricky, conditions were quite varied. I mean, if anything, you got to say that's a more broad kind of overview of what conditions could be like at circuits going forward, right? You're going to get cold, you're going to get warm, you're going to get damp, you're going to get dry. Each and every day, McLaren seemed to be in a pretty good place. Mercedes were good when it was cold, but not so much when it warmed up. Ferrari, not quite as seamless a test as they would have liked. I think Lewis struggled a bit on that final day, and Red Bull, they said themselves, Pierre Wache said himself, you know, that test didn't go to plan fully for them. They're still working on carb. They had Flovis on that Red Bull right at the end. In terms of those top four teams, those established front runners, McLaren seem to have the least problematic test. They're going to play it down. Of course they are. Of course it's in their best interest to play it down, but they are going to go into that season opener in Australia this weekend on Sunday looking like they are the team to beat ultimately. Now, of course, Drive to Survive dropped covering the 2024 season last week, and I'm 7 episodes in. I enjoy it for what it is. It's not really for me, okay? It's not really for us as hardcore fans. You get some interesting little nuggets, little bits of information, little behind the scenes that I enjoy. I take it for what it is, right? And the McLaren dynamic is spoken about, and I feel like this is something that is going to rear its ugly head again unless they have learnt from their mistakes of the past, for which there have been a fair few. Looking back at how Monza played out last year, for example, where obviously Lando and Oscar started 1-2. Oscar did not hold position, made the overtake, a ballsy overtake around the outside of his teammate. Then Lando's exit was compromised and Charles Leclerc found his way through. The problem with that is that Charles was able to get past Lando as well. It wasn't just a swap in positions. Hungary was an issue, communication, it was very public. In a way it didn't need to be. They needed to be a lot more firm, a lot more matter of fact with Lando than they were at the time. They gave him, I guess, wiggle room to feel like, oh, maybe I can kind of negotiate myself into this win. And you're in the heat at the moment, in the car, in that time. Communication is absolutely key, and McLaren haven't been at the front. They haven't won a Constructors' title since 1998, before last year. They didn't learn from Hungary because they made not the same mistake, a similar mistake in terms of a miscommunication, okay? It was more of a miscommunication with Lando in the first instance, and then perhaps a miscommunication with Oscar in Monza at the second time of asking. And these are Formula 1 drivers. They're built to win unless you are super on it and you're trying to have this 2 number ones that McLaren, it's an ego thing, I think, for McLaren. It's like how we go racing. That's how Zach describes it. And that's all well and good. Constructors, you can definitely make the argument, you know, the 2 best drivers, ultimately you still score more points overall if you have 2 drivers who are really, really good. They might occasionally take points off of each other. They might crash into each other. It might get a bit internal dynamic-y, but I think from a constructor's point of view, you can make that argument. From a driver's championship point of view, it's much more difficult if you've got a car that's, you know, far and above ahead of the rest, like the Mercedes was in the Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg era. You can let them 2 scrap. You can let them 2 fight. And you know you're still going to get 1-2s most weekends. And even if they do hit each other, like in Barcelona, where Max got his first win, you'll still win out the championship comfortably in the end with at least one of your drivers, and the constructors won't be a problem either. F1 is way more competitive now than it was back then. And that is the concern I have, right? Looking at McLaren, if you're going to have this approach, this mentality that is a choice, ultimately, it's a choice. They don't have to do it this way. They could have kept Daniel and had him be an established number 2. Lando would have kept him in that number 2 place. Probably, right? Daniel just never seemed to work with that car to get the best out of himself. But he could outqualify Lando every now and then. Okay, he could win in Monza. But they chose, you know what? No, we don't want this 1-2 dynamic. We do want 2 number 1 drivers. Okay, which again, the premise, you can say it's admirable, but is admirability going to win you championships when it is hyper competitive. They're giving themselves a problem, and if you want to give yourself a problem, you better know how to deal with it and come up with a half decent solution. Minton's decided to join us for the ad read. Squarespace have been supporting the channel for years now. The all-in-one website building platform that I've been using since 2018 is when I set up my portfolio on Squarespace. But no matter the service you offer, if you have the need for your very own beautiful online home, Squarespace is the perfect place to start. Cutting edge AI powered design tools, Blueprint AI really does help you bring it all together super easy, super simply. Then go on and refine. You can play around with it to your heart's content because Squarespace is completely free to try. It's only when you want to publish your finished website that live to the world that you have to pay anything. I also have my merchandise on TOMMO'SRacingGoods.com. It's honestly a breeze, and you don't need anyone but yourself and Squarespace. 24/7 customer support helps you out if ever you need them. If you're interested in giving it a go, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 and that will give you 10% off of your very first website or domain once you're ready to go live. Because then you look at the drivers as individuals, okay? Starting with Lando. Lando's someone who's very vulnerable, very open, very self-critical, very transparent. A lot of qualities that in a human being, I think are very, very positive. And you want people in your life who are like that, who do kind of acknowledge who they are, where their weaknesses are, where their strengths are. However, you have to then question in this Formula One context, perceived as a weakness, right? Because I think many drivers have spoken about this. Showing that kind of vulnerability is risky. You know, if you give your competitive rivals an inch, you give them anything to capitalize on, then they're going to do that. Certain drivers, you look at a Max Verstappen, prime example, right? I will do everything I can to win. That is the quote, okay, from his interview at the end of last year with Lawrence Barretto. And I fully believe he means that. He means everything, right? He will do whatever he can. And if there's a few mind games in there as well, I think Max is more than happy to play that, right? When Lando got upset about Max not being respectful and not calling him the day after Austria last year, if Lando's going to let that stuff get to his head, then why wouldn't Max play into that? It's happened. I know Lando's annoyed, and I'm going to let him fester, and I'm going to let him be annoyed. Lando has said, he says it in his DTS episode, you know, he wants to win his way. That's fine as a philosophy to have. However, you look at the body of evidence over recent years in Formula One, you look at Michael Schumacher, ice cold killer, Ayrton Senna, right? You look at Lauda, you look at Hunt. There are way more examples of drivers who have achieved success by being uncompromising, making a lot of enemies along the way, especially back in the day. The friendships that exist now within the paddock didn't really exist back then, so it was probably easier back then because you were typically less close to your competitors than this new generation. This, it's like the Drive to Survive episode with, you know, Pierre, Charles, Alex, George and Lando. You know, these guys grew up together. And I think that's an interesting point, right? I think that most of us, myself included, I'm sure most of you, where you haven't grown up in this hyper-competitive sporting field, but also with your friends. Say you're part of a football academy, right? Growing up and you're a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old. Your friends are your teammates because you all travel together and you do this. But also they are the ones you are ultimately weighed against, you're measured against in order to get the opportunities. Those people around you are your competitors as much as they can be your friends. I think that is just instilled into these people, these individuals, that you can have an off-track relationship and an on-track relationship. That again, I would find that very hard to empathize with, but they seem to be able to keep it on lock. But then it's easy, you know, Leclerc, Gasly being close mates because they've never really been competitive against each other in Formula One. Now, if Alpine give Pierre Gasly the car to then fight Charles on track, that relationship would get strained. But then coming back to Lando and Max and that dynamic, and whether Lando has that cutting edge, and I've given this a lot of thought, because if Lando wants to do it his way, I think there is one thing he needs to do differently, and it's almost like an acceptance, right? Because Max is that guy. Max is that ice cold killer, right? George would be like that. I think someone like Liam Lawson, I see a lot of that in him. Not here to make friends, and they're uncompromising, and they will do whatever it takes to win. But Lando needs to accept that, okay, that's how Max is. I can't get annoyed that he is pushing me off track, going beyond the limits in Mexico. That's who Max is as a competitive animal. If he wants to do it his way, fine, but he needs to accept that the other drivers aren't necessarily going to do it that way and are going to be prepared to put more on the line. Accept it, fine. I'm going to do it my way, you do it yours, and we'll see who wins out in the end. Because honestly, Lando has got the one lap speed. He's got the race management. Yes, Singapore, he almost crashed a few times, which was concerning. But you've got to think that as he gets more used to being at the front, you've got to remember Lando only won his first ever Grand Prix last season in Miami, right? Less than 12 months ago, compared to Leclerc, Verstappen, Hamilton, Alonso, all these guys who have been here for a long time and been winning for a long time. He is fairly new to this game, so it's going to take a bit more time for that to become as comfortable a place for him to be leading a race, to be comfortable at the front. But you say comfortable at the front, that almost relies on the teammate being able to deliver. Now, of course, Oscar Piastri is someone who I have a lot of belief in. I think he's 2 years into his Formula One career, going into his third. There's an assumption from my end that there is going to be an increase, a continued development, a move towards his ceiling. The question in reality, is that going to happen? Potential is the word, because he's only had 2 full seasons in Formula One, whereas Lando's had 6. But potential is a dangerous word. It's a very, very dangerous word. Many potential athletes, potential superstars do not realise their potential for whatever reason. Right now, as of today, going into race 1, Lando does, I think, have the edge, especially over a race distance. In that race management, can Oscar work on managing these Pirellis that Lando's been using for a lot longer than Oscar has? Because I feel like last year there were so many times, even though it was a very one-sided head-to-head Lando-Oscar, a lot of times they were within a tenth, and too many times Oscar was then 4 or 5 tenths down the road because he cocked up, made a mistake. The problem for Oscar is that if he allows Lando to build that advantage at the start of the season, it becomes increasingly easy for McLaren to be like, okay, we get to a point where we're going to start prioritising Lando, as they had to eventually. They had to concede that at the end of the year, didn't they? 26, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in 26. There is zero guarantee McLaren are going to be at the front. This is an opportunity for both Lando and for Oscar. They both know that, and they both will know that they've come out of testing with seemingly the best overall package. And if they can get ahead early doors and let everyone else doing the catching up. Lando, a big part of the problem for him is that he was the one trying to catch Max, so he had more to lose. In that position, in that dynamic, McLaren need to cash in this early advantage, especially given that round 9 Barcelona is the change to the flexi wings. Long story short, they're stiffening up the wings by about a third. Okay, the static load tests require less deflection after round 9 than they do currently. Whatever reason they changed the rule, they just decided, right, it was fine and then it's not fine. We don't know. I'd love to know in the comments below. Let me know what reason, outside of, give me another reason apart from they see the flexi wings and the McLaren maybe getting a bit of a steal and a bit of a march in this 25 season. They want to kind of pin them back a little bit in the same way that the floor changes hurt Mercedes going from 2020 to 2021. I can't see any other reason for changing it because, well, the wings will still flex. It's physics. Carbon fiber wings will flex on Formula One cars. That's going to happen. Otherwise, they'd be too brittle and they'd just snap, right? So you need tolerance in there. So why have they changed the tolerance? I just would love the FIA and Formula One to just be transparent and open about why they do these things, rather than kind of treating us like mugs and just trying to keep us in the shadows. Either way, that changed round 9. We know McLaren have been making good use of getting as much flexion out of their wings as is permitted within the regulations. Fair play to them. Engineering solution, that's what Formula One's all about, taking the rules and then interpreting them in a way that you can exploit and make advantage, right? This is what Formula One has always been about and should always be about. Technical innovation. People like to throw the word cheating around a lot and it gets misused so much in this sport. When that changes, that is going to affect the performance of the McLaren. That's going to affect the performance of everyone. And it could potentially change up the pecking order. Again, McLaren have made good use of flexi wings. Red Bull less so. You know, once round 9's been and gone, maybe Red Bull becomes a more competitive animal because their car is more used to having a stiffer setup on their carbon fiber wings, right? Perhaps that changes the pecking order somewhat, along with the typical race to race, depending on track characteristics, ambient temperature, etc., which cars are stronger in certain Grand Prix than others. This advantage for McLaren is the here and now, the start of 2025, but they need to bank on it. They need to exploit it. They need to maximize the point scoring at the start of the year because there are so few guarantees going forward. And again, not only because of the flexi wings after round 9, that changing, but of course 2026 new regulations, teams offsetting focus to 2026. which is a huge year. Obviously, McLaren have an opportunity here to win a driver's title for the first time since Lewis did it in 2008. They've got the constructors already, but they want to go back to back on that from last year. Max isn't going to want Red Bull to take their foot off. Ferrari are going to want to deliver a title, a driver's title for the first time since Kimi in 2007. Give Lewis an opportunity as well, and Charles, because this is Ferrari's biggest opportunity for a long time. I've done a video talking about Ferrari, how their time is now link above. Even Mercedes, like with George driving as well as he was last year, if they can just work out how to make that car operate in hot temperatures, they could be cooking. But it feels like a bit little too late. We've been with this ground effect regulation car for a while now. These new cars, slightly less for 26, slightly less dependent on that ground effect, but more changes on the external aero to try and reduce that dirty air effect. It's going to be an engine formula. Seemingly everyone in the know seems to indicate that they think it's going to be an engine formula first and foremost, like it was when the V6 turbo hybrids first came in. If there's multiple teams getting a march at the start, then perhaps everyone else kind of falls off, because you've got to remember as well, with the ATR, the sliding scale of aerodynamic testing regulations, the disadvantage of finishing lower down isn't as painful as it would have been in the past, because you are getting somewhat of an advantage that you can bank and actually use for your 2026 car development, right? 26 cars were in the wind tunnel start of Jan. We saw Alpine post that picture early doors, that little spy shot. You know, McLaren have really found a way to turn things around from where they were kind of 18, 24 months ago. And, Rob Marshall, I think, deserves a lot of credit for that. He, came over from Red Bull, has been a real star for that team. I'd like to do a profile on Rob Marshall, actually, because I feel like he doesn't get, same with like David Sanchez at Alpine. These technical minds don't get the acknowledgement I think they deserve, okay? I think a lot of Red Bull success put down to Newey. Newey's been amazing for that team for a long time, but there's a whole technical team at Red Bull Racing who have done bits, and Rob Marshall moved to McLaren, and that seems to have aligned with their uptick in form. Rob Marshall definitely seems to have had an effect at that team. Peter Prodromo's been there for a very, very long time, as he had his time at Red Bull. Spoiler alert for the quiz. They've got great minds, clearly, they're McLaren. Clearly, they've got a technical team that really works, and Andreas Steller and Zach Brown. That bodes well for 26, but there are no guarantees. So you need to strike while the iron's hot. When the opportunity is here, BMW learned from this back in 2008, when they had a shot at the title, and then they kind of pulled resource early to focus on 2009, and it all went wrong because Brawn. You cannot take anything as a given in motorsport. In top level Formula One, there's a lot to gain, there's a lot to lose. Everyone's on 0 points right now. This theoretical advantage for McLaren, it will only bear fruit if they can get it done, and if they can iron out the creases, the problems of years past. You learn most in life from your mistakes. In theory, they should be better, more competent, a bigger force at the front of Formula One. But is that how it's going to go in Australia? We'll find out soon enough. Like the video if you enjoyed, and please let me know in the comments down below. Do you think McLaren are going to capitalise or fumble? How's it going to go in Australia? My name's Tomo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.